Welcome back to another episode of Phoenix Edge. This is an RPG and gaming news podcast. My name is Hat.
I'm Eric.
And I am Stan.
And as you can see, we have two new guests here today. We have Mike from Resonant Arc. How are you?
Doing good. How are you guys doing?
Doing pretty well. And we have Hian, returning champion. How are you?
Middling.
Well, I'm glad you both are here. Let's go ahead and go over the topics real quick so people have an idea what they clicked on here, and then we'll kind of visit a little bit before jumping into our podcast. So this week we are going to be covering RPGs that we felt really made the consoles, prior Sony consoles. So we have Final Fantasy VII for the PS1. Then we have Final Fantasy X for the PS2, Dark Souls for the PS3, and Witcher 3 for the PS4. In addition to that, we also asked you all to take a survey. So we'll go over those results a little bit after each game. We won't be able to linger there too long, but we'll just kind of see the responses, comment on a few of them, and then keep moving. So without further ado, I just want to visit a little bit more with our guests here. So first question for Mike here. I just got to get this out in the air. You know, I was looking at some of your comment sections, and there's a rumor going around, and I just want to ask, like, have you been juicing?
No. So I was surprised by the number of people who seemed to be noticing that I look and sound a little different. So I have a new microphone. I purchased a new microphone because I'm working on a really big re-release of a series that I do on my channel, a Final Fantasy retrospective series. And I want it to be like as close to top of the line, like Netflix documentary sort of like level of quality as possible. So I bought this new microphone. And because of that, it's picking up a little bit of that lower registry a little better. So voice sounds a little deeper in the new mic, and everyone took that on top of the fact that I've gained a bunch of weight. Since last time they probably saw my face on the channel, which was, I don't know, months and months ago. But I have been lifting weights, and so I've made some beginner's gains, and everyone assumes as soon as you've put on like 5 pounds of muscle that all of a sudden you're juicing for some reason. So no, I am not taking steroids. I've gained a lot of weight because I was stress eating. I'm working on reducing that now. I've lost about 15 pounds in the last 3 or 4-ish weeks and trying to get healthier. So that's all it is.
Good, man.
I need to take inspiration from that. The COVID indoor thing has hit me like a ton of bricks.
Oh, it's been bad.
Yeah.
It's been bad.
Well, I've been working remotely. So like literally I realized like my day consisted of me getting out of bed, then walking to my kitchen, sitting in a chair, working till like 6 at night, and then like going and sitting on the couch. Like that's not good. I wasn't even like leaving the door, like to go to my car. Yeah. Like
same.
Yeah. So anyways, so I just wanted to get that out there because I saw some of those comments and like I was just kind of crying, laughing while I was reading.
It was a lot of people. It's like, okay, like, I'm sorry, man. I'm in stress eating. That's all it is. Like, anyways.
Anyway, so if you're not aware, Mike is from the Resonant Arc YouTube channel. And do you want to give us a little bit of background on what you do for the 3 people listening to this that don't know who you are?
Yeah, so I mean, touched on it a bit. The biggest thing I think from my channel are my JRPG retrospectives. Try to make it kind of a documentary style, like diving into developer interviews, learning about, what went behind the scenes into making this great game that we grew up with, something that, people tend to have fond memories of, and sort of just deepening people's appreciation for those things. On top of that, we have a podcast that we do sometimes these days. We're going to try to get back to doing that more regularly. Kaysen, unfortunately, due to the situation we're in, he got laid off. While he's looking for a new job, we might be getting back in the studio doing more podcasts a little bit more frequently. And I'm going to try to get back to just releasing more kind of like off the cuff, just thoughts on things that are happening, just me talking to the camera a little more frequently so that it's not like, 2 or 3 months in between episodes that go up. So we'll be looking to upload a little bit more frequently, but that's kind of what we do.
Well, I think this situation has kind of hit us all in different ways, so it's definitely understandable. I'm really sorry to hear that, but really excited to see what you guys have coming up next. So
I have some good thoughts. I have a lot of things milling up here. Some YouTube type things, some rankings, some top 10s.
Dude,
I'm thinking about.
Top 10s are great. Top 10s are awesome.
We'll see what people respond to.
We're doing a top 5 today.
Yeah, we are. That's true.
Anyways, Hian, how are you? Hian is a game developer, and what else do you want to tell everyone about you?
I don't know if there's that much to say about me, really, outside of that. I'm trying to make things work.
Yes. Hey, that's all we can do.
Yeah, just very tired. Just wrapped up crunch for this season. So now I have 2 or 3 months of normal.
Well, it's going to be exciting, right?
Very exciting. I was subjected to a lot of strange things in these last 2 months. I was told by the director that I'm working with that because of the contractors that had to come in due to COVID, that we were going to be refurbishing the office. So I'm relying on you. And so I have been running in and out of the office between like a storage building across the street and like pulling desks and shit and laying cables and all sorts of weird stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with game development. And at some point, my back kind of gave out, and it was kind of a nightmare. I did get a nice look at a filing cabinet in one of the storage areas where they had like 20 years worth of game design documents and manuscripts that are just kind of laying around, molding in that place. And it's very sad. That's the state of preservation in the industry in Japan. It almost made me want to like just take them and bring them home and be like, well, you're not going to be using these anytime soon. Maybe I should.
Does anybody even know they're there? I mean, No,
that's kind of what it was. And then I had to wash the chairs and stuff. Yeah, it was crap. Basically, it was almost 2 months of working on average 11 hours a day with no weekends off. I worked 3 days and then 1 day off and then 3 days and then 1 day off, and it's like 11 hours every day. So
oh my god. Well, I'm happy to hear that you have some time to recuperate over the next month or so. So hopefully. So well, I appreciate you waking up this morning. You do live in Japan, so we have quite the time difference, but
I'm really from the future.
You're from the future.
Yeah.
Anyways,
2020
yeah.
Oh yeah. It hasn't changed.
Let's go ahead and jump into today's topics, just because we have a lot to get through and we don't want to run this, to 5 hours. That'd be good. So
let's talk about FF7.
We're going to make this work, guys. We're going to make this work. Okay, so for our first game on the PlayStation 1, we were talking about it, and almost all of us, well, 3 of us picked Final Fantasy VII, and then 2 of us picked Final Fantasy IX, the better Final Fantasy. However, we're going to talk about Final Fantasy VII because that one's good too. And so who wants to start us off? Basically, just start us off with why you think Final Fantasy VII is such a good game. Mike, why don't we start with you? Well, what makes FF7 so great to you personally?
I mean, without sort of just diving into and repeating all the things I've said over and over and over again about it, I have been playing it again with my girlfriend. It's her first time. She was interested in playing it because she's a fan of Final Fantasy. She's played Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy X, Final Fantasy VIII. 6 is her favorite. And so she hadn't played it before. She didn't have a PlayStation at the time it came out, and then her dad got one right there as Final Fantasy VIII came out, so they picked 8 and they moved on from there. So anyways, she was kind of like, oh, why don't we just wait for this remake and try that? I tried to explain, like, it's not going to be the same for all these different reasons. But, this is one thing I haven't said in talking about it a little bit. A lot of people, have been kind of debating or fighting about with the FF7 remake, like whether it should be classified as a remake or not, or a total sequel, or just something completely different. And why would you want the same thing again?
Mhm.
People who are in favor of changes, just go play the original or something. We want this to deviate or do different things. And I think about other video game remakes that I've played that were real faithful to the original experience, that felt almost like a definitive version, right? Because one of the reasons she never really jumped into it, because she can't get over the Lego man sort of like aesthetic of it. Like she
Right.
just finds it very weird looking, and she wishes that it would look a little better than that. And so for someone like her, who would really love that original story, but would like to see a more modern look to it, that's what I felt like the Final Fantasy VII remake could be. Anyways, I'm getting a little bit off.
No, that's
what makes the original great.
perfect.
But I'm playing through it again with her because of that, because I played the remake. I showed her a little bit of it and said, you got to play the original first. You literally have to, if you want to have any idea what they're talking about at the end of this, like what they're referencing, why this is a big deal, why anything what they're saying matters.
Right.
You have to play the original. So we're playing the original. And I guess what has really stuck out to me on this 30th run of the game or something is it's in really, really great balance between sentimental or just like really dramatic sort of storytelling, and this ability to be lighthearted and silly, and the fact that you're getting real serious about little Lego man on the screen, and it's real rudimentary in the way. At the time, obviously it wasn't. At the time it was state of the art, but there are some, I guess, limitations in terms of the depth, I suppose, of like cinematic level storytelling you can do at the time. And they took advantage of those things in ways that just like made it really fun, that make it so you have this like nice swing, this nice balance between like really endearing, lighthearted, funny, charming moments. And then you can just get right back into it and really believe in the pain that these characters are feeling. It's pretty remarkable how they're able to seamlessly move between those two things. And that's kind of true of just like classic Final Fantasy in general, but it really stuck out to me this time, is that I'm sitting next to her, and this person who told me, I can't get over the way this looks, this is really weird, in the first few minutes, is genuinely laughing, genuinely shocked. Like I was watching her specifically. We just got to Corel, and the guys that walk up to Barrett, and he's like, they're sitting there like downtrodden. They just punch him in the face, like the first thing you see. And she's like, oh, like what happened? And like she's totally gotten over the stigma of what she's looking at, and she's engaged in the characters and in the storytelling. And I think that they pulled that off really well with this balance that I'm talking about. And so it's a very, very balanced, very well told, very well structured story, perfectly paced, and has the right amount of charm and fun, and then really serious, dramatic, storytelling. And for me, it kind of pulls that balance about as well as you can do. And I think that's, and on top of it being a very accessible RPG, easy to get into, whether you've played a lot or not, just makes it something that a lot of people can enjoy. And it was a big part of the reason why it was so successful.
It's interesting you bring that up about you and your girlfriend playing that, because I actually had my wife play FF7 for the first time earlier this year, and unfortunately the remake was her first introduction to it. She wanted to I was playing it, and she wanted to watch me play it and such, and go through it. And I tell her throughout the entire game, I'm like, I'm telling you, this part here, the original does it so much better. And I felt like I was annoying her with it. Yeah. So, but we actually went through the original game after that. And we got through like Midgard, like the first 5 hours of the game. And she was like, wait, that's like the entire first game, just that 5 hours. I was like, It's like, I told you, it's like they took that game and prolonged it as long as they possibly could. And then, Tetsuya Nomura at the end of the remake just like kicked the can, and it's like we're going a whole different direction with this. And I was like, and I'm telling her, I was like, well, this did not happen at the end of 7 in Midgar. This one's a little over the top, but yeah, you're absolutely right. That she got engaged with the characters. I don't think the blocky polygons necessarily bothered her. I think she understood the era where it came from, but she loved it too.
I think that like what you guys are getting at is this game is just timeless, because when I was a kid, I think that I enjoyed Final Fantasy VII for different reasons than I do now that I've gotten older. And it's crazy because every time I play it, I try to only play Final Fantasy games once a year because I'm terrified of me just getting like bored with it, or like I don't enjoy it anymore. It just becomes too routine. So I don't want to play them more than at least once, or at most once a year. But this most recent time when we played it for our channel, I found that I got a totally new appreciation for it because this time I was paying attention to Cloud's story so much more. And there's so much involved with his character about basically he's very hard on himself to such an exceptional degree that he thinks so poorly of himself that he would believe that he's just not even worth like love or like friendship, and that like everyone must hate him unless he's actually in Soldier, right? And so it was just like very touching to me to kind of reflect on myself. Not that I'm like going around telling people I'm in special forces, right? I think he takes it to a whole new level. But I was just like, you know what? I'm kind of hard on myself. And like, I could see the toll that it's having on him, the character. And then I was able to place that on myself. And like, I was like, this is why this game resonates with people, because there's different characters that are going through different character conflict from things in their past, whether it's, you know, dealing with the complete demise of your town and, you know, the economy, or just, like I said, with Cloud's character and just the self-doubt that he experiences. And it's just, I think there's a meaning there that you can actually derive out of it and apply to your own life. And I'm not suggesting anyone play Final Fantasy VII and start making life choices. I mean, I don't think anyone should be a terrorist. I don't think that you should go blow up a reactor, you know, but I think that there's a human decency level to the story that is just very endearing, that is not really prevalent today with so much marketing bleeding into new games. And, you know, they have to wear clothes from Tommy Hilfiger, and they have to like have this look, and they have to be this demographic. And it's totally just not the same. And it's just, I don't know. It's just such a good game, but I'll stop talking right there and let somebody else talk. Hian, what do you got?
Oh, putting me on the spot, huh?
I am.
Well, I could give you the spiel about like my time with Final Fantasy VII, but I guess like there's so little to say about Final Fantasy VII that hasn't been said a million times before by pretty much everyone, right? It's the game of the decade, or like 2 decades now, I suppose, or
25
running 3. So like there's not that much to say about it really at this point, but actually now I'm playing it for my son. So I'm kind of taking it in a storybook direction where, you know, before he goes to bed, I'll fire it up on my phone, right, through an emulator. You know, it smoothens out the backgrounds a bit and takes off the jaggedness of the polygons. And I'll just read it to him. I'll ask like kind of like a book, right? And he's 8, and he's totally engrossed in it, like totally focused. That's now pretty much every time I've been working late when I can't get home, he'll be asking me when my next day off is, so that, you know, we can carry on going through the story. And it's interesting to see because he's not like unexposed to newer games, right? He's almost done playing Breath of the Wild now on the Switch. He's taken out the 4 beasts. He knows what good games look like, right? So it's not like it's not like he grew up with sort of the Super Nintendo graphics and this is like the newest, fanciest thing, right? But yeah, he's just blown away by it. And it's really interesting. He's sitting there. The first thing he said when, you know, you have the cutscene and the train comes in, he's like, the trains in this game are really cool. And I could I kind of remember that myself when I played the game. I think that Final Fantasy VII has a strange mood to it that's very difficult to quantify. That I think has to do with aesthetics, and that's probably the one thing that a lot of people don't talk about. Simply because when you say that, maybe a lot of the love for Final Fantasy VII is rooted in aesthetics. Everybody assumes it's about sort of the graphics. The graphics are great for this time, but it's not really about that. It has a very unique, strange visual design to it when it comes to like the colors and stuff.
Oh yeah,
where
for sure.
there's these kind of northern light-esque blurry neon like colors over everything, you know, even not just in Midgar, but when you're there are a couple of scenes that stand out to me, like around Northern Crater and some of the nature scenes, like the weird place that you get to if you kill Ultimate Weapon, right? Where it falls down and creates the crater, and you can walk up into this. I don't know what they call that, like the something forest, right? There's some. Yeah, there's some strange kind of use of lighting there, and the particular choice of colors and stuff. The entire world has a very weird, dreamy look to it, if that makes sense. Kind of like an ephemeral, kind of feels like something that you might have dreamt when you were a kid.
Like a fantasy.
Kind of, yeah, like a fantasy. Yeah, right. But,
You know,
but it's like it's kind of yeah. And Corel and all these places have a very just I don't know the word for it. And like, is it melancholic, or it just really hits you very hard. I feel every single time there's like, you run into a new screen, there's like a dramatic angle to it and stuff like that, and the colors are real vivid. And I think it's very easy to be sort of drawn into, I guess, just the mood of the game, right? And it's the same thing with the soundtrack that has like after FF7 with FF8 and stuff, the soundtrack's got a bit more. I don't want to say on point, but like production wise, they were still working off the sound chip, I think, and they were still using MIDI compositions and stuff like that. But at that point, I feel as if Uematsu started using more real instruments, not real instruments, but like he's using harps that sound a bit more like harps and stuff like that, and going a bit more orchestral at times. And but Final Fantasy VII has a very sharp synth sound to it throughout, even when he's using technically what's supposed to be instruments, even like the flutes and the woodwinds and stuff like that. It's still if you go into like the MIDI settings, it's still the synth strings. It's not the strings, it's the synth strings. And it's not like it's not the piano, it's the L piano, right? He's using those settings, and it just it all comes together to create this just very unique thing that there's no other game, I feel, where you can say, well, that looks like Final Fantasy VII, or that feels like Final Fantasy VII. You play Final Fantasy IX, and of course it's a great game, but you can say, well, the world, it's kind of like Final Fantasy IV, for instance, right? Or, you can look at Legend of Dragoon and you can be like, I see some Final Fantasy in this and stuff like that. But I can't think of a single game where I can go and say, well, you know what, that kind of looks like Final Fantasy VII. That game feels like Final Fantasy VII. It is entirely unique in its tone and texture. And I think that on a subconscious level, that really just hits home with certain people, because they're just like, I don't know exactly what I'm feeling here or what I'm supposed to feel about this. This is strange and alien and intriguing, right? And I think my son is having that response, right? We just got to the point with we met Aerith and the Turks, and then got over to Aerith's house. But the fight against Airbuster, the moment that robot comes on the screen, my son is like all over it, because he loves robots, right? So you have this huge weird robot coming out of there, and the battle theme kicks in, and he's at that point, there's not a sound, right? He's not saying anything. He's just totally focused on what's going on the screen. And there's something about just the theatrics of that game that I think stand out. And the pacing is immaculate. Like, he's an 8-year-old, so I can see him watching somebody play a game would get boring very quickly if you were doing the same thing all the time, right? But the distribution between gameplay and then story, and then back to gameplay and back to story, it's so snappy, right? none of the story scenes like overstay their welcome. It's not like 30 minutes of dialogue and then 10 minutes of gameplay, and it's not like 2 hours of running around a desert and then a 5-minute cutscene and then another 2 hours of running around deserts, right? So I really think that there's something about the structure of the game, right? The aesthetic thing and the structure that just makes it easy for people to just, first you look at it and it's just like, okay, it's got my attention. What the hell is going on here? And then it just keeps railroading you from like moment to moment to moment. And that doesn't give you time to sort of stop and go, oh, I'm bored now, right?
So on that point, as I'm playing through with Chrissy, she's like, okay, because she's been real skeptical about FF7 because she loves 6 and she loves this other one. She's the type of person who can get, I don't want to use the word elitist, but that's the only word I can think of, about like, nah, this one's the best. This was mine, right? And so like, there's no way this one could be great. So whenever I say, why don't we sit down and play it? She'll say, maybe we can do it for, like 30 minutes. And then, like I want to go eat or want to go. And then as soon as I realize it's been 30 minutes and I come to a point and I stop and I say, why don't we stop right here? So, well, why don't we just go talk to Barrett and just like finish that scene? Why don't we just go? There's a flow to it where it doesn't feel like there's a good place to stop because, like you're saying, it just carries you. You don't feel like you're having to push through it. You're being like pulled through that experience. And the pacing and the structure and the balance is a huge part of that.
Yeah, and the point you're giving her earlier, Hian, like you're absolutely right. There isn't really a game like FF7 because I'm thinking about it right now. It's such a bizarre type of game when you think about it. Like you start out in this cyberpunk like city, then you move out, and the next place you go to is a quiet little town, a Chocobo Ranch. You go to Costa del Sol, and then you're going to like Cosmo Canyon and then Nibelheim. It's like it's something completely different feeling every place you go to, but somehow the world somehow still brilliantly makes itself believable. Like you believe that this world has all this stuff in it, despite like each area you go to, the theming is so radically different feeling, but very it all makes sense at the same time. And I don't think other Final Fantasies have pulled that off to the extent 7 has.
Yeah, the thing that's very interesting about that is that this is just my sort of mania coming into the picture here, but I actually really enjoy sort of looking at 7 and going like, does this really make sense? I've kind of made a little list of things that doesn't really make sense in Final Fantasy VII, and it's growing by the day. But the thing that's the cool thing about Final Fantasy VII is that the more you do that, the more you realize that most of those things don't really matter, and most people will not notice, right? Because it's just crafted in a way where it doesn't matter, right? And usually you would get really annoyed about those things. Like if you're watching Star Trek and suddenly everything about the lore starts changing in a new season, that's kind of, oh, hey, hey, what you doing there, man? That's you're doing something weird with the writing. I don't like it. But I think Final Fantasy VII has a very, I don't know, like it's wrapped itself in cotton or something, and it's just kind of, okay, yeah, Shinra had a great war with the world. Okay, there are no other nations in this world, which is kind of strange, right? So except Wutai. Like I don't understand how they could have had like this great war. They used to be a weapons manufacturing company, and now suddenly they're in control of the entire world. And there are no other big cities on this entire planet, and you're just kind of I don't know, like, what did they build June on, right? What's that cannon pointing at, right? What's what are you defending yourself against, right? And there's some spotty things in like the world building, but it's like, that's not the point. Like the point is that they have a giant cannon at the sea border there, so they can kill everybody, right?
What's it protecting?
Right? They're they're horrible, evil minions, right? So it's I think there's something special about the structure of that game, because usually most people would like, well, not necessarily most people, but a lot of people would be like really zeroing down on those things and be like, no, this is bad storytelling. This doesn't make sense. The logistics there don't work. And it's like, well, but it works in all the places where it matters. And so we were just kind of comfortably shoving those small things aside as kind of trivia, right? It doesn't really matter for the story of Final Fantasy VII at all. And I think that speaks to how well written it is, because I've noticed lately that there are certain stories that do that, where it's like, this story is not about having like a Lord of the Rings like perfect lore structure for the world where everything makes sense. It's about really highlighting those emotional moments and building those through like solid characters and, you know, dramatic gravitas and things like that. And in that regard, I don't think. I think Final Fantasy VII is second to none on the PlayStation. So.
Stan, what do you got? You've been awfully quiet over there.
Yeah, I got to follow that up somehow. But I think, like Mike nailed it, talking about the pacing, and then Hian also with the aesthetic. Like those two things, I think more than anything is going to draw people in. Like if you've never played the game, and I think that's. Looking back on it, that's what drew me into it as well, because when the game opens up, you know, your main character is this soldier guy and he leaps off the back of this train. Like he doesn't walk out the front, you know, of the passenger seat, you know, he's like literally riding on the train with this giant buster sword on his back, and your first impression is like, whoa, what a badass, you know, like. So
that's to say nothing of the cover of the game, which drew me to it. It's just that huge freaking sword on the dude's back. Is like, what is that? I have to know what that is.
Yeah, and he's just like looking up at this ominous looking structure or building or whatever. Yeah, so like the game's art direction and aesthetic does a really good job of like making you intrigued, right? Which is ideally every game would do that, but ironically, many JRPGs have tried to kind of just take the how would you say, the tropes or the traits of, you know, Final Fantasy VII, you know, main character with a giant sword, for example, and like kind of just copy paste that into their game, but it's like not quite the same as you know, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, essentially. Like it doesn't quite land the same way. But for me, like that's what drew me to the game the first time, and that was really special. And it's one of those games I wish where I could play it for the first time again, but of course you can't. But then as I replay the game, I start noticing more things like the attention to detail of the storytelling through the gameplay, which the way Sephiroth is introduced, for example, towards the end of the Shinra building, and then the flashback, which Mike has done a video on. We talked about on a 4-hour episode of just
4.5,
Fantasy.
And we didn't even cover everything. We had to. Yeah. So
if you really want us to hear us get into the weeds on Final Fantasy VII, like we did, we had an episode for 4.5 hours talking about just this game. So, but like the attention to detail, like not only that's the best example, like how Sephiroth is introduced, but also there are other just little things like all over that just kind of add up. And because of Final Fantasy VII, that's something I've like looked for in other games going forward. And I found that a lot of games like to kind of cut in half the gameplay and the story, right? Separate. So you'll have things that happen in the gameplay that then the characters react in the story as if like that battle was really difficult or something, right? But you were over leveled and you just you wiped the floor with the boss, and then but in the story it was really challenging, so the characters have to act like it was really challenging. Like issues like that, and FF7 was like already way ahead of the game on that type of thing. Like they were, I don't want to, the only way to explain it is just for me to like start listing example after example, but I hope we get the point. Yeah, it's like that's one thing, and then the second thing is like the personal journey of Cloud, because I think a lot of people, if you're not familiar with the story, would just look at that character and think, oh well, yeah, JRPG hero, huge sword on his back, like he has to save the world, of course. Like this, how can this be all that special? But actually, it's kind of his false persona that in the beginning all you're getting is kind of like a few peeks behind the curtain, and then until eventually the big reveal kind of halfway through the game. And it's like it's a really powerful moment for the character. And so, and Mike did a FF7 video on that as well, the plot twist video. So that's like a really important part of the game, I think. And like, even if you already know the surprise, you can replay the game and kind of relive that, because you can pick up on a lot of the little clues that were there that you may not have noticed the first time. Yeah,
that's what I've been paying attention to specifically when Chrissy's playing it. I'm trying to see, is she recognizing the hints?
Yeah,
like is she questioning this? And so far, like, she doesn't have any suspicion of Cloud. I can tell that when this is going to happen, it's going to blow her mind. And that's the thing that's always bothered me about FF7 discourses. People want to talk about the cross-dressing scene. People want to talk about Aerith's death, as if like that was a big gun punch. No question. But these things pale in comparison to the real reveal of who Cloud was and what really happened in Nibelheim. That they build that up with that first telling in Calm. And that's when the story really starts. It's right there. It's like, this is what we're actually here for. And when you get to the payoff of that, it is among the most cathartic moments I have ever experienced in any form of media, storytelling, literature, anywhere. It's so well crafted, so well structured up to that moment, and so well hidden and concealed, while at the same time they're giving you all of it all along the way. It is masterfully done. It's masterfully done.
That,
for sure.
That plot twist with Cloud, though, like you're saying, that's so masterful, because it blew my mind when I first experienced it, because it's two plot twists in a row, right? And the first time you see the first one, and Sephiroth's revealing all this information about Cloud. And I remember thinking, Cloud's looking at Tifa, and I'm like literally in Cloud's eyes, and she's like not denying it. And in my mind, I can't think of any other possibility. And I remember thinking, like, he is a puppet. This is crazy. This game's crazy. Yeah. He's a puppet, right? And I literally I was like, this is the wildest game, and then
everything Sephiroth says.
And then finally in that scene when he takes off the mask, the Shinra mask, and you see Cloud's head, I'm like, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah.
I was just
I should have, because it's so easy. It's so plausible.
I mean, that was
right there
time, but that caught me completely off guard. Like, I didn't suspect it for a second. Neither is she, which was actually that's actually one of the most satisfying things ever. It's not just you learning that, but when you play with someone and then they discover that and you see that on their face, it's absolutely priceless. It's like,
I love watching people experience that for the first time. Just videos online of people, my first time ever playing FF7. I'll go straight to that part of their playthrough, and I just watch their face go like, what? And I've never seen anything like it ever. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, gents, I think we should probably keep going here. I hate to say,
right on,
because I could feel us like digging deeper and deeper. But obviously, just to wrap up here, Final Fantasy VII is just, I think, one of the greatest games on the PlayStation. It helps sell the PlayStation. I mean, it's just a fantastic game, and easily the second best Final Fantasy under Final Fantasy IX.
Second highest selling game on the PlayStation 2.
It was definitely the Trojan horse of RPGs in the West, because they use those cinematics as a commercial over here, and that's what people got to sell. When they played the game, they're like, "Wait, this isn't an action game. It's a turn-based RPG."
Yeah,
that was me.
But they still loved it.
Yeah. Well, at the beginning of this podcast, I brought up that we had a survey that we sent out to our listeners, and we got y'all's opinions on what your favorite RPG was. So I'm just going to read some of these. We're not going to be able to linger on it like we just did for Final Fantasy VII, but just want to get it out there. And if some of you want to acknowledge some good picks and stuff like that, feel free to. So there was 17 responses, got a lot of Final Fantasy VII, but people also brought up Xenogears, which excellent game. Suikoden 2. Let's see here. We got Final Fantasy IX, Final Fantasy Tactics, Valkyrie Profile, Final Fantasy VIII, Chrono Cross, Lunar 2, Eternal Blue, and The Legend of Dragoon. And then there was just kind of those games duplicated over. So obviously the PlayStation 1 was just a killer for RPGs. So many good ones.
not one of those would I dispute if someone wanted to pick that as their favorite game on PlayStation. They're all good enough to be considered that.
Yeah, that's not even half the list of how many good RPGs there are on the PS1. PS1 era, it kind of feels like an endless library of good RPGs you can grab onto.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So let's keep moving on here. So for the PlayStation 2, we discussed some options, but we ended up with Final Fantasy X. And Hian, I have to be honest, I was really surprised that you picked Final Fantasy X because I thought you would be one of the more critics of Final Fantasy X. So I think I'm most interested in hearing why you like Final Fantasy X, because I'm a huge Final Fantasy X nut. I love Final Fantasy X. But what do you got?
So I'm a bit conflicted about Final Fantasy X. I actually enjoyed it quite a lot when I first played it, because I played it when it first came out, and I still enjoy it. It's one of the few Final Fantasy games besides 7 that I actually find is very easy to replay. I think it still has a fairly nice pacing to it and stuff like that. So it's not too complicated or anything. So it's one of those that's easy to go back to, which I think is a saving grace in regards to sort of, or relative to some of its flaws. But the reason I picked it, to be brutally honest, is because I don't think the PlayStation 2 has a ton of great JRPGs.
Yeah. Not like the PlayStation 1.
Yeah, for me, I think the PlayStation 2 was a huge step backwards from the PlayStation 1 when it gets to that's when the JRPG started struggling with, like, how do we balance the fact that this is actually a niche genre, and then we keep up with the content flow, right? Because JRPGs are big and expansive and all that. And now it's also going to cost twice as much to produce them because of the advances in 3D graphics, right? So I think it's here we started to see sort of a lot of the things that I loved about, like, the PlayStation 1 JRPGs and getting dumped in favor of better graphics and voice acting and stuff like that. You know, there are very few JRPGs on the PlayStation 2 with a world map, and I'm an advocate of the world map. I believe that the overworld is one of the best like design things to ever come out of, like, that genre.
So of the lackluster RPGs on the PlayStation 2, with none of them really comparing to the glorious library of the PlayStation 1, why does Final Fantasy X stand above all the other lackluster RPGs?
Because, firstly, it's a generally good game, for one, right? Like, I would never look at it and go like, oh, this is a bad game, because it's not a bad game, right? And also, I'm a European, so I was blessed with the expert sphere grid, which you Americans were not upon original release. So, I never had to struggle through the bull crap that is the original, like, American sphere grid, where you're deadlocked to these stupid paths for most of the game. So it very much felt like an extension, maybe, of the systems of, say, Final Fantasy VII and 8, right? Where you're free to do what you want and have fun with it. But there's also kind of like when you pick the path, at least you still have to kind of stick with it for a while, right? Which gives you a little bit of that class structure and balance that you had from 9. And so I think the battle system in Final Fantasy X is absolutely great. It gives a little bit to those people who liked the more structured systems of 9, and it also gives a little bit to people like me who really enjoyed 7. I think the story is generally good, right? Of course, there are opinions about the voice acting and some of the plot twists, and the main villain sounds like Winnie the Pooh. That's unfortunately. Hi there, Titus.
That's very intimidating, though.
Yeah, it was very diff. I was like, dude, like, I know that Final Fantasy has always had this thing, like, where the villain comes in and the game pretends that you're not supposed to understand that it's the villain, but it's like, that
guy's bad. I know.
Yeah, I can tell by his bangs, right? He has, like, they took, like, Sephiroth's bangs and they made them, like, 1 million times more elaborate, and you understand that's reflective of his power level, according to... They
asked the voice actor to make the most untrustworthy sound possible.
It's like, it's all in the hair, man. I saw the hair and I was like, you're the bad guy. And
so, I mean, I totally agree with everything that you're saying, and I, like, some really wild choices made with this game. But look, like Final Fantasy X is probably it's in my top 5 favorite Final Fantasies. And I think that for me personally, when I look back on Final Fantasy X, besides just having nostalgic memories of playing it with family and everything like that when it first came out, is like this game, just like Final Fantasy VII, really has something like gritty and meaningful to say that I don't think a lot of JRPGs really tackle. I mean, in this game, you have a complete like criticism of religion and just blind faith to religion, which is a very gutsy thing to take on and is very surprising for a JRPG. But then also the way that it approaches racism with Waka is just the most realistic interpretation of that told in a video game story, or really a lot of television shows today that I've ever seen. I mean, I look at a lot of television shows right now where we have like the new Star Trek show and, you know, they have the Klingons saying, "Make the Empire great again." And it's just like, that's not convincing anybody anything, because it's so not, even if you agree with it, like, it's just
on
like,
the nose.
Yes. No one is going to identify with that and be like, "Wait a minute, I'm like the Klingon." Like, no one's going to think that, right? But with the way that they interpreted it, and with Waka's a very nice guy. He's a very like good dude. Like, you don't even get the impression that he's a bad person. And a lot of times that's how people are that are actually racist. You go to dinner with them or whatever, and they're very nice people outside of insert effed up belief when that topic comes up. And for Waka, it's the Al Bhed, and it lets you empathize with him a little bit because of his brother, because of what his brother went through. And seeing that character arc completely run its course, I just think that, like, that's just so awesome that it was able to tackle that in a very touching and meaningful way. But then also, like I said, just approaching religion and criticizing it. I mean, when I was a kid, I was going to church every Sunday and I played Final Fantasy X, and I walked away from this game thinking they kind of have a point. Like, you know, just any kind of blind faith to any kind of belief is just, that's not going to be good for anybody. You have to be willing to question things. And so I think that beneath all the goofy villain choices and the robes down below your crotch and the goofy antler hair that that people have, there's a lot of meaningful substance there for people to latch onto.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I wasn't like, you know.
I know you were.
The game does a very good job not completely demonizing things. Like, you're not going to demonize Waka now for hitting Al Bhed. They give a reason for why he hates the Al Bhed in particular. And like, even Yevon has like a series of roots to him that were not of like evil intent, but, you know, just things got out of control from how things stood out. So it's not like necessarily saying like religion is bad. It's just like something about this just got completely out of hand, and people, you know, just put strong blind faith into it, and you shouldn't necessarily do that. Is kind of how they went with it.
There's probably like a additional commentary there too. Like, I know we shouldn't talk about Final Fantasy X too. That doesn't exist. But you know, it's interesting to actually watch what they replace Yevon with in Final Fantasy X too, right? Because then they all go haywire with technology and stuff like that, and it's you know, the stuff that a lot of the people are up and doing in Final Fantasy X too isn't exactly like, should you really be doing this kind of stuff? So I feel like if you take them together, even though like Final Fantasy X is a bit of a dud, there's probably some I agree with Eric that there's a good deal of nuance there when it comes to how they're handling. It's not like they're just ham-fistedly telling people that no, religion is bad and they're just hitting you over the hammer with that. I think there's probably a little bit of like, probably people need something to believe in, and, you know.
Well, that's what makes it, I think, great, is that it has that nuance. Whereas a lot of times when you see something with a polarizing opinion placed into a media like video games, it's kind of hitting you over the head, right? And it's unable to persuade anyone, or maybe that's not even what it needs to be, but it's distracting. It's it brings you back to the real world because you know what they're talking about, and it's a stupid framing for the argument, right? But this just is a very nuanced, very easy, just eases you into it. And, you know, I just think, despite its flaws, I think that's something worth praising. So,
I will say for Final Fantasy X for me, I did play through it again recently, and yeah, it does have some mighty rough edges to it than I remember back in the day. Like the voice acting is definitely more in a primitive state, trying to match the lips to everything, to the point that like you're even getting someone as talented as Tara Strong sounding really awkward at times and such like that. But I don't know, something about this game just like I can criticize it as much as I can praise it, but at the end of the day, I can play through that game any day. There's something about it that is just so great about it. The world building is just absolutely amazing in that game.
mm-hmm.
Like at the beginning of Spira, you know almost nothing, and when you get to Xanarkand, you feel like you know everything about this world. Like you go through, you have a historian telling you about famous events that happen in the areas that you're in. You learn how the people work in this place. Like even a place like Luca, like they establish that like the people give their lives all the time to protect Luca because you know it's a place to play blitzball essentially, and that's the one thing that keeps people happy in this world now. And it's yeah, like I said, the world building is just so absolutely amazing, and the characters that you play with along the way are amazing. I know a lot of people give Titus a lot of crap for being the main character, but I'm one of the few people that actually enjoy his story. Like, I just think to myself, if I got just sucked up by a giant whale in the sky that just destroyed my city, threw me 1,000 years into a future, onto onto this stranded temple in the middle of the ocean, I'd probably be reacting very similar to how he would be. And even then, by the end of the game, he starts maturing more and coming to realization who he is and being more accepting by the very end of it. And, of course, learning more about his father helps with that. And that's actually a very interesting plot point that I enjoy the most, is him learning more about his father, because Jack, best character. And
what was so great about that component was just like he spent the whole game blaming his father, and then by the time he gets to the end and he starts putting his memories back together and he realizes actually it was his mom. Like his dad was actually a pretty good dad. His mom was the problem. And like that's often how people think about things, right? Where they're blaming somebody else their entire life until they realize that person wasn't the cause of, all this emotional pain. And so I thought that was also very nuanced as well.
That's a theory I did hear recently about the mother.
Yeah. Well, and it also plays into what you were saying earlier, Hat. And one of the things that I think draws me to Final Fantasy X is it's a critique of belief systems.
Yeah.
Not of people. And it, in the polarized world we live in today, in the world where outrage has been turned into currency, essentially, where the media is consumed with trying to drive at your fears and make you outraged about them, and to separate things into two opposing groups as often as possible. We forget that it's not that people generally are good. People generally are good people. We believe a lot of really stupid things.
Yeah.
And this just applies across the board, because we've come from ages of ignorance and trying to figure out how the world works. And there's a strong sense for tradition, things that are important to us. I think we all have that with these games we grew up playing, and we love going back to them and revisiting. There's this tradition that means something important to us. We're just kind of drawn to that as people. And so when you see somebody like Waka, who you like, that's very important. The player likes Waka. And then you see him believing these really messed up things. It creates a sense of conflict that is what is reflective of the real world. rather than trying to cancel Waka. You want to help him change. And that's what we need to be doing with, our neighbors and our fellow human beings, right? We need to be trying to help each other get more into belief systems that are beneficial to the society and that help everybody and can help include people and that we can compromise on, instead of trying to demonize everyone because they believe something that we don't agree with. And I think Final Fantasy X provided a nuanced look at that, even if it wasn't explicit, right? Even if that wasn't like the explicit intention of the developers when they made the game, that was the outcome of what they made.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of with Hian too, in that, like, I don't love the PlayStation 2 era RPGs much. I really miss overworlds. I talk about that all the time on my channel. I don't understand why we don't have overworlds today.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, it literally makes no sense to me. It's so much easier. It's way less expensive and it works. It still works. So, there are a few that caught my attention and that I liked, stuff like Rogue Galaxy and a few others that, I think these are pretty cool games but they're not like that kind of on that pinnacle of like greatest games of all time, like we had on the SNES and the PlayStation 1. It's kind of where that golden age came to an end. But, I harp all the time on my channel about execution versus ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And Final Fantasy X is real conflicting for me for this reason.
Yeah.
Because for me, if you're distracting me with bad execution, it's hard for me to appreciate the ideas. And so I've had a similar experience with FF10 that I've had with games like Xenogears or Nier Automata, for instance. These deeply philosophical games that have really powerful messages. But you don't, more with those than with FF10. FF10's not quite as philosophically, but I think its message is as important as those are. But where the execution, especially if you're not familiar with Carl Jung and people like that, Jacques Lacan, if you're not familiar with who these people were and like what they believed and what they did to revolutionize their fields, you're kind of left in the dust. But at the same time, there is a really satisfying experience in being able to reflect. How much can you reflect and gain from the game after it's over by discussing it, by learning more about where the developers were influenced and inspired by, and why were they so fascinated with this topic. And FF10, I think, is very replayable, like Hian said, for that reason. Like, you can just peel away these layers to it and just like see things you didn't see the first time. And you miss this one little thing. I might have had my head turned away for a few seconds and all of a sudden it changed my whole perception of what's going on. I was very confused on the point of dreams and what's real and what's not. And then I realized it's just aeons. They're just summoning. They just use the term dreams, but they mean they're summoning. And it's, okay, now it all makes sense. It all comes full circle. Like, it's just little things that when you peel them away, just give you a deeper and deeper appreciation of what the game's trying to do, what it's trying to say. And all of that is wonderful. And I really like FF10. It doesn't crack the top 5 for me. It sits at number 6. Because the execution just really, really bothers me at times. And I can feel very distracted by wonderful talent. Those voice actors are not bad voice actors.
No.
It has been Square's localization teamed with their voice direction that has really bothered me from the beginning, and it hasn't really got much better. So
that's something I feel like I always have to say beforehand, is like, I usually blame the voice direction for the voice actors. Like, if you've heard James Arnold Taylor in other media,
he's great.
He plays Titus. He's great. Yeah. Tara Strong, obviously one of the most talented voice actresses in the industry. She plays Riku. John DiMaggio, Waka. John DiMaggio, freaking Bender from Futurama, and does fantastic in a show like that and other material he's in. And he gets a lot of awkward moments in this game. Every character has like those awkward voice moments or those moments of silence that are just like, oh man, I really don't want my parents in the other room to hear this stuff type of deal. But Yeah, I know for a fact they're fantastic voice actors and actresses. It's just the way that I look at Final Fantasy X as like one of the more primitive eras of voice acting. I know that roots back to the PS1 mostly because there's a lot of bad voice acting in
Or we talk about Legend of Dragoon
PS1.
for a second. I mean, like, yeah,
Jesus, yeah.
yeah, but
Yeah.
but the PS2 is when voice acting really started kicking. So I understand there were some primitive ways of doing it at the time, and like you said, I don't think it's gotten that much better.
but the thing that's so weird about it is that there's this huge discrepancy with 12. 12 just stands as this pinnacle in the middle of all this mediocrity for Final Fantasy voice direction. And you know that it can be done. It's not like there's this impossible gap between cultures. Like there are great anime that get localized and have amazing voice acting. There are great JRPGs I've played that have great voice acting. Particularly some of the Fire Emblem games I've played, like I'm not bothered at all by anyone's voice. It's totally natural and believable. And for some reason, Square Enix, aside from 12, who they had a kind of a particular set of people who were working on that, the guys who translated that, they're just
Gold.
different in the way that they approach it. They're really, really good.
Right.
And so, but it can be done, but just for whatever reason, I think that there's just an approach, or I don't know, some kind of mindset behind how to go about doing it that I just don't really sync with in terms of the way Square tends to do it.
Right. I think that there cannot be enough said, though, about playing something when it comes out and experiencing it as it was on day one, because I mean, I got the game right when it came out. I was looking in magazines, looking at screenshots. I was super hyped up. This was the first PS2 game that I thought would actually be like the next gen, right? And then I remember sticking that disc in, and like my mom got it for my birthday, right? And she was like, she had to fight in line to get it. And she's like, I want to see what all this hubbub's about. And then she just sat on the couch with me while I played it. And we were just both in awe because the graphics just looked amazing. Like the voice acting today, the voice direction, we should say, not necessarily the ability of the voice actors, but it just seemed like such a higher caliber to anything else that was out at the time. And I think that I find that people are a little bit more critical of some of those things when they play it for the first time, last week, right? And I think that's just the reality of, like, I have a different experience because I played it when it came out. So it just, like, those things I acknowledge, but I also realize, like, it doesn't bother me because I still remember what it was like when it came out.
Yeah. You really can't overstate the leap from, say, like the Super Nintendo to like the PlayStation, and then the PlayStation 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jeez, I remember I have the demo with the demo disc for the PlayStation 2 where there was like a trailer for Final Fantasy X. I don't know if you people remember it, but it starts with like the classic Final Fantasy theme playing, and then they scroll through footage from the different games. And then when they get to Final Fantasy X, they have that triumphant version of Tidus theme kicking in, and you start seeing all the graphics. It's probably somewhere on YouTube, right? It's a really good trailer, and I remember seeing that for the first time. It was just like, whoa, this is the future, right? What the fetch? Like the jump from 9 to 10 graphically?
Dude, it was insane.
You know where I actually saw that commercial from? I saw it, and I watched it over and over again. I remember it was in the Spirits Within DVD bonus section, and I watched that over and over.
It's just
and
like,
over
this looks way better than this movie. No,
like, I probably
more entertaining it is. Yeah,
I have that going on repeat on my PlayStation 2, like just watching it over and over and over and over again, and just like the music and the everything, just whoa.
Well, if you guys are familiar with the YouTuber Metal Jesus Rocks, I'm sure he does like retro pickup videos and like the best way to play retro games on your television, stuff like that. And he was talking about Final Fantasy X, and he's with you, Mike. He likes Final Fantasy 12 better, but he was giving some history, and he said that, for him, he was a hardcore PC gamer at that point, and he only played PC because he was just like, this is like years ahead of console. And then he saw a trailer for Final Fantasy X and was like, my computer cannot do that. Like, and he went out and bought it, and that got him back into the console. So
yeah,
I think like it's just exceptional if you experience things when they come out. Stan, I know that you're a fan of this game, and we've been talking over here. So what do you got?
Yeah, for me, like you, it's in my top 5. I think I have it at number 3. Actually, I go 7, 6, and then 10. And for me, like everybody's been making really good points. I agree with Hian that like the biggest, I guess, disappointment with FF10 compared to the other games is the lack of the overworld map. Like that's the one thing that's like, oh, if they could just adjust that, but the game it's not going to happen at this point. But I think for a linear RPG, which we've seen many more in this style since Final Fantasy X that have abandoned the world map setup, it has like the best world building of any that I've seen for a linear game, right? And you do lose that kind of sense of scope, right, in the world, but that at the same time, Spira is like this contained island almost, or like set of islands kind of. So it kind of makes sense like that you can kind of traverse the world as it's known, at least, you know. You don't know what's beyond it. I think it's kind of implied that there's more out there, but like they're kind of contained to this area of the world because of the sin and the whole situation. But
every generation gets smaller and smaller until you get to 15 and it's like just literally like an island. But Stan, keep going.
Just to add to your point real quick, well, what I like that they did is that even though it's technically very small where you are, they still successfully made it feel large in scope.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that they did strike a fine balance right there. So I'm usually okay in that regard, even though I'm a world map advocate myself. But yeah, but anyways.
Yeah, and then in regards to storytelling, they use a classic technique that I think just never gets old, which is to kind of have if you have like a very strange world that has like a lot of particular rules to it, you create what's
Fish
like
out of water.
a fish out of water or a cipher character. This is the classic like Alice in Wonderland kind of approach, right? Where you have the main character that you see that the player's perspective is, or the audience's perspective, also doesn't know what the hell's going on, right? With all this Yevon religion stuff and like sin is like out there and could attack at any moment. Like, what's going on here? I don't understand, you know? And then you have the other characters explain it to them, and it very conveniently explains it to the player as well, right? I think this is just a classic storytelling technique that there's a reason that like the isekai anime, regardless of quality, are so popular, right? It's because they're all fish out of water stories, like transported to a magic fantasy world, right? Where the main character doesn't know anything or like how the world works. And so then the other characters explain it to them. So Final Fantasy X is like, go ahead.
No, it's the Narnia move.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's another good example.
And it's so easy to project yourself onto the main character.
Yeah, because you don't know what's going on.
Gets you immersed.
Yeah, and also when all these religious traditions are kind of brought to I call him Titus, but I guess it's actually Titus. But
it's Titus.
when he's confronted with those, his reaction is the same as the person playing the game. Like, well, that's kind of stupid. Like, why? Yeah. You know, like,
I care.
Yeah, like I care. Like what's the point of this? You know,
the most awesome character when you replay the game is Auron, because now that you know what he knows, you just realize how cynical he is about the whole thing. And
he's my favorite character in the game. For that,
what's amazing about Auron that I didn't discover till recently, I noticed that he is one of the best voice actors in terms of delivery in the game, and the reason is because most of the time his mouth is covered. So he doesn't have to follow.
That's a good point.
Movements.
Yeah, that's
I bet you like every voice actor and actress in the room was just staring at him angrily, being like,
"Well, yeah,
doesn't have to match the lips." Yeah,
that was the first time they did that, and they talked about that where like they would have to match the Japanese track, so you would have to get like 3 sentences out in like 6 seconds sometimes, and it just didn't deliver well. But
yeah, Auron and Jack though are like some of the coolest Final Fantasy characters ever made.
We got
it does make me and not make me want at the same time, because I know Square Enix would just screw it up. Is like a prequel starring Jack, Auron, and Brasco.
That'd be cool.
I would have taken that over 10-2, but you know, like I said, Square Enix was screwed up, so I would just leave it as a what if type.
The story of when Jack
Do you
went
really-
out for cigarettes and never came back.
Do you really want this game to start off with checked with like a microphone singing? I mean, this is just it goes out for cigarettes.
It's playing on abandoning kids.
Yeah, I got it.
Going on a boat trip.
Oh, geez.
Anyways,
in regards to the voice acting, though, like you were saying, for me, I was kind of in a similar situation as Hat. I played it very close to release, and having played a lot of JRPGs prior to that, I was like, this voice acting is awesome. Like now, of course, you look at it back with, much more better direction from other games. Like
even on the PlayStation 2, yeah.
Yeah, like if your first if the only voice acting you've seen is or if you started, say, like with Metal Gear Solid, right, and then you went to Final Fantasy X, I could see how you'd be like, yeah, this is not great, right? But compared to other JRPGs at the time, like Legend of Dragoon, Valkyrie Profile, like Grandia on the PS1, to then Final Fantasy X, it was like, even though the voice direction was off, it was like a significant step up from those games. So it was, even though by today's standards it's not great, it's like it was a pretty big improvement at the time, much like the graphics, much like the cutscenes, which just blew my mind at the time.
Yeah,
like the presentation as like a leap into the PS2, like you guys mentioned, was like really amazing.
All right, let's keep the ball rolling here, guys. we're doing good, but let's keep it going. So needless to say, Final Fantasy X, definitely a highlight for the PlayStation 2. I think we can all agree on that. If somebody's like, hey, what's a good PS2 RPG? Even the most critical among us can, I think, suggest Final Fantasy X to give it a shot. But some of the other options that people brought up here were Kingdom Hearts, Xenosaga Episode 1, Suikoden 3, Final Fantasy 12, Dragon Quest 8, Persona 4, Dark Cloud 2, and we got some more Kingdom Hearts, Radiata Stories, Final Fantasy X, Shadow Hearts 2, Shin Megami Tensei 3, Nocturne, Final Fantasy X, the original Shadow Hearts, and some more Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy X. So,
no Wild Arms 3? Are you fetching?
Well, you clearly didn't take our survey, Hian.
Look, man, I'm just as upset as you are. Love that game.
Yeah.
That list, I just have to say, those are great games. It's incredibly underwhelming in comparison to the list of the PS1s from the survey. It's not even close, man.
Well, I mean, Final Fantasy
Saga
IX's missing.
Episode 1, are you kidding me? In comparison to like all those other stuff,
Xenogears, yeah.
Xenosaga's good, but like Dark Cloud is good. But these games are not like pinnacle, top of the line, all time classic golden age games. It's just, I really feel like the PS2 took a step back with our.
Yeah, look at the bright side, man. At least they didn't say Wild Arms 4 or 5.
Oh no.
Well, what I like about and we don't have to linger on this, but I'll just get it out there here. But the PS2, like, I think that generation, just when they remaster those games, they just port really well, right? They just look really, really good. And there's, like, you play them on an emulator, they look great. I mean, they just feel very modern when you upscale them still. Whereas a lot of times with PlayStation games, it's starting to show.
You get remasters of PS2 games way more than
PlayStation.
Well, I guess we have been getting some more. I guess they have that Grandia HD collection and a few others, but
yeah,
you didn't get a lot of PlayStation 1 games getting remastered over PlayStation 2 era games.
Yeah, for sure.
Not in the ass to port.
Hey everyone, hope you're enjoying the podcast. Do not worry, we're going to go right back into it, but I just want to take a moment to let you know about our media partner, RPGFan.com. We've been with them for about a year, and they've just been a blast to work with. They give us game codes. We're able to help them with video footage, and it's just been a great time for the past year. And I definitely want you all to go check out their website. It was down for about a week. They're transferring to a new host, but it's all back up, and they are our first stop place for news, and we're constantly referring to them for reviews. They have reviews going back to the late 90s. There's other podcasts on their page. They have Random Encounter, which is news and like opinions, and then Retro Encounter, which does more game discussion type things. and then Rhythm Encounter, which does soundtracks. So that's returning, and it's just been great to work with them. They also have a YouTube page where they're starting to do video reviews, which is really cool. So definitely go check them out and check out their new website. They put a lot of work into it, and they've just been great to work with. But let's get back to the podcast.
Hey, but if we could just for a moment here pretend that Metal Gear Solid 2 is a JRPG, that would be my number one pick.
Metal Gear Solid 2 is a freaking masterpiece.
Man, I could talk about that game all day.
This is what I like to call a tangent.
It is a great game.
It's a Metal Gear conversation now, boys.
All right, so moving on to the PlayStation 3. In my opinion, the PlayStation 3 was a big transition from like JRPGs to more Western style games. However, we do have a Japanese game on here. We have Dark Souls, which is a very iconic game. And I am not a fan of it, but I'm interested to hear what you all have to say about it. So,
and
Mike,
here's another rule here real quick.
Yeah.
You can change between Demon Souls and Dark Souls. We don't care.
That's fine.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah, I made a list of my top favorite games many, many years ago on my channel. And I put Demon Souls and Dark Souls essentially in the same slot because I feel as strongly about both of them. I think the only reason why I prefer Dark Souls, and this is totally just a personal thing, is I like the structure, the connected world structure and the bonfire system much more than the hub nexus and the MP system of Demon Souls. I like having checkpoints that you revive your HP and your potions, which are Estus, and your MP, your spell charges. They get recharged, but all the enemies come back. Like that whole bonfire structure of the game to me was genius. I just loved it. And it gives you a chance to practice like a particular part more often than in Demon Souls, where you got to go all the way back to the beginning level, run all the way back to that part, and practice that part again. So that is probably the only thing, on top of maybe music, that pushes Dark Souls a little bit ahead for me. But Demon Souls was the first one I played, and that happened to be the experience that a lot of people had, where you just don't get it. You don't sync with the game the first once, twice, 3, 10 times, 20 times. Why can't I freaking like beat this game? Like, what is going on? Is it so hard? I quit, and then you come back to it 6 months later. You quit and you come back to it. A lot of the people had that experience with Dark Souls. I had that one with Demon Souls, and I finally had like figured out the formula, the play style that works. And so when I played Dark Souls, my experience was very smooth, and I just like freaking adored it. Exploring every inch of it, and there's something about the way that those games revolutionized specifically the fantasy action RPG, where you put your arms on the shoulder buttons for attacks and defense, right? I always kind of felt that way, like, let's say, between, say, Halo as a shooter to what Call of Duty did, where the L bumper brings up the sights and the right fires. It's kind of like the left hand on the gun where the right hand's on the trigger. It just feels super intuitive. And as soon as you have that revelation, it's like, yes, this is how first-person shooters were meant to be played from the beginning, and they just had never figured it out. Unless you're playing keyboard and mouse, obviously. That's preferred for most people who are super hardcore. But on a controller, it was a revelation. And for me, the way that Demon Souls and Dark Souls controls worked was a revelation for that sort of third-person adventure game, melee combat. It was just so easy to move the character, and it was so tight controls-wise that then the challenge was not, oh, which button do I press for this? It was, how on earth can I recognize what the boss is going to do? And you have to really pay attention to how the enemies move and the equipment that you have and your strategy and your approach, versus just like trying to figure out how to like move the guy through the space, which, I mean, like Mario 64 did a great job as like an intro into 3D, but a lot of games really struggled with just clunkiness controls wise, like moving through space. And with the PS3 era, that had been, mostly figured out, but I feel like Demon Souls and Dark Souls really just kind of like took it to the next level. And it's just a fun game to play. It is fun to fight. It is fun to explore. It is fun to like find out all the little lore pieces when you're reading on the descriptions of the items and the weapons. It's great. And so for me, like, I just got addicted to the gameplay loop. So
Yeah.
So, I think for me personally, let me just get this out there. Like my experience, and then now that we just had this glorious explanation of why it's so good. And I get that, and I hear the same stuff all the time about Dark Souls, and then also this commentary on like the story and like what lessons learned through perseverance of people completed Dark Souls, and they like.
Great point. I didn't even bring that up. I need to say
you're going to say it way better than I am, because I was going to criticize.
I grew up, especially through high school, being a very timid, very reserved, very shy, a very self-deprecating, self-loathing person. I hated myself for mistakes, and it made me very, very hesitant to try new things or to put myself out there in front of people. I was very easily embarrassed. I quit on things easily because I didn't want to be seen as being bad or having failed. It was a mentality that I really struggled with all the way into my 20s. And Dark Souls, on top of some other things in my life, helped me break that mentality so hard, to where I took a new job probably about like 6 months after playing Dark Souls. And my manager kind of came down on me for a couple of mistakes that I made. And as a younger person, I would have felt horrible, embarrassed, and felt like, oh gosh, I would have gotten so down on myself. And it just would have been a horrible experience. But I actually saw that as a positive thing. And I feel like the ability to allow yourself to fail and to say this failure is going to lead to something good. I'm going to get better at this because of that failure. I just learned something. Understanding that failure is part of the experience of learning was partially instilled and broke this horrible mentality I had because of the Demon Souls, Dark Souls experience. So anyways.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing for me in that when I was younger, I loved games like Castlevania on the NES, Ghosts and Goblins, and games like Ninja Gaiden. They were such difficult trial and error type games that I was so into it. I was so into getting to know and learn what I did wrong and what I can do better. And the next time I go around, because you have to go all the way back if you fail. So you really got to think about how you're going to take this approach next. But, over the years, we go into SNES era to the PS1 N64 era to the PS2 era. And games have gotten a lot easier since then because they didn't need to be that hard. Your games are much longer now. They can be paced a lot better. So you don't need to add the level of difficulty that the NES developers did at the time. So over the years, I feel like my ability to play games actually got worse than I was when I was younger, which is an odd thing. But then I get introduced to the Soul series on PS3, and I'm thinking to myself, "Oh, okay, this is just people are saying it's hard, but it's probably just going to be some easy rollover 3D type game that might just be a little harder than the usual thing. It should be no problem." And the game was just kicking my ass so hard. It was just such a surprise on how terrifyingly difficult it was for me at the time. And I was already in that impression, like, all right, screw it. This game's too hard for me. I quit. I'm not going to play a game that just like punishes you this hard. And then I'm realizing to myself, like, this is a game that I would have been all over when I was younger, like with Castlevania and stuff like that. So like, why do I think so differently now when I play it? So I tell myself, this is a game that you are supposed to fail at. This is a game that you need to continuously do trial and error on. Like, you are not really meant to beat it the first time unless you're some god of gaming or whatnot. And so I told myself, I'm like, okay, this is clearly not how the game works. The hand holding is gone for this type of game. This is not your typical action adventure game where you can just overthrow it easily. You got to go in there. You got to think about it. And what I love about the Soul series, and especially Bloodborne, but it did start with the Soul series, is that it reinvigorated my willingness and my determination to take these hard trials down. And I really thank Dark Souls for what it did there, and why it's definitely that and Demon Souls are like some of the best games you'll find on the PS3, no doubt.
So here's the thing, guys. I play video games to relax and have fun. And when I own Demon Souls and Dark Souls, and I get where y'all are coming from, and that where there's a certain amount of personal growth that's involved in that. But, you know, when I'm trying to relax and recuperate and recharge my batteries, I don't want to.
You like horror games?
A little bit.
A little bit. But do you relax when you play a horror game that you like?
I don't play, like, I like horror settings more than horror games, but I see what you're saying. There's enjoyment to be had, yeah. But there's something about me, like, slamming my controller through the wall. It's just not, like, I would rather just play a good RPG that has enough challenge for me to enjoy myself, but I don't want to, like, be, like, infuriated, right? And then go to bed not beating the boss, and then, you know, just, like, it's just, yeah, it's just not for me. But
I think that's reasonable, right? Because, like, you could ask a person, like, why don't you play an instrument, right? Well, you know, it's a lot of work. Do I really need to learn an instrument? And you can kind of compare, like, if you have a very difficult game, there's kind of like a question there. Is it worth it to master this skill, right? Do I really need to become proficient at playing Dark Souls? Is it a necessity in my life? And I can totally see people being like, no. But I don't know. For me, the reason I like that series so much is because I think it filled a void in the action genre that we didn't really have. Like, people make comparisons to Castlevania, obviously, and things like that, but they're a bit different because essentially Dark Souls is the it's funny because I'm going to turn it around now. It's the Rainbow Six of character action games, right? And like, because I grew up playing a lot of I played, like, well, Rainbow Six has been turned into bullshit now, but, like, originally that used to be a strategic, right? You get shot once, you die. You're done with, and your party members do not recover. If they die, you've lost them forever, right? It used to be it was supposed to be a military simulator. I think I even heard that it was used for they used, like, that framework in somewhere in, like, a training kind of VR, you know, one of those where you fire on, like, a screen. But anyways, that's besides the point. I used to love those games. Absolutely. Like, just the planning and, like, the punishment and trying to figure it out. And it even went as far as, I think, games like Max Payne, right? If you play that on the highest difficulty, you move into a room, there's 20 guys in the room, you get hit once, you're dead. And you really have to make everything out of that, like, first slow motion dive, and you have to, like, literally shoot everybody in the room in a single jump or you're going to die. And figuring that out, that's like a puzzle, right? It's a puzzle in physical space. Like, how do I maximize the output of my violence and kill everything in this place without dying, right? It's the perfect puzzle for a psychopath, right?
I love the way you worded that. How to maximize my violence.
Yeah, that's the point. And I used to love games like that. More than anything growing up, I loved those games. And then the PlayStation 2 era came, and we got sort of the character action, the melee focused character action games, right? We had some of those in the PlayStation 1, but they were very limited, obviously, super clunky, not very refined. But we got Devil May Cry and God of War, and that made that genre, right? The 3D kind of character action, like you're running around and you're bashing things over the head with a sword. And back on the PlayStation,
in that
yeah,
that's kind of how action games were made during that era.
Sure, and they can also be difficult and punishing, but like they're a bit different, right? They're more about sort of the power fantasy and the combos and stuff like that. And I also grew up playing Bushido Blade, which again was like a Rainbow Six of melee combat, right? Where you know you get hit once, you die. There's a sim aspect to it, right? And I'd wanted something like that in like a Devil May Cry-esque kind of environment, right? Where you're exploring, running around, but there's the high tension strategical combat where if you get hit a couple of times, you're dead, and you really have to think about what you're doing. And I remember playing Demon's Souls for the first time. That was my year when I was an exchange student in Japan. I walked into a place called Staya, which is a shop that sells used games and stuff, and they had Demon's Souls running on one of those like test consoles. And somebody had just walked away from the game. I think you're standing on one of like the walls, right? One of the manned walls in the area. And I picked up the controller and I started moving, and I was like, wait, how does this game work? Like, this is weird. Like, why isn't square? I'm pressing square, it's not attacking. And I had to like do a couple of trial swings to figure the controls out. And I move forward and I get cornered by a couple of enemies. And I'm about to just like unload on these people, like using my God of War logic, and it's just not working. Like I'm running out of stamina, and you know I'm taking way too much damage, and I die. And I'm like, wait, that's not how that's supposed to go. And that's like this is not how this is supposed to go. And I'm like really stubborn. We were actually there to buy like cell phones because we just arrived in Japan, and my friends were like fucking around with the cell phones. And I stood there for, I think, 3 hours just playing the game, just like, I do not accept this. I will win, because I'm a spite-driven person. So I'm like, I'm very spiteful. So if something doesn't work for me, I'm like, no, I will do this until I finish it, until I destroy everything. And so I wouldn't leave the store until I had like gotten back to the same point and defeated those guys and moved on. And it was all very satisfying. And I was like, I wonder what this game is about. Demon's Souls, that's cool. Like that. And I think I've loved Demon's Souls ever since. It's I like those kind of games. I like Rainbow Six, and it's the Rainbow Six of character action games, right?
Yeah.
What I will say is I might turn a new leaf, because I was checking out some like reviews and like kind of like other people's thoughts on Dark Souls before this conversation, and I saw a lot of preparation that people were bringing up later in the game, where they're preparing their character, preparing for a battle, with equipment and things like that. And I love that aspect about RPGs. I love the preparation aspect. And so I have a feeling that if I stuck with it, it would probably click. But
also, in addition to what Hian said about changing the way you think about how to approach a game, right? Like, I can't overstate that. You think you understand how to play an action game because you've played a lot of them. I played Prince of Persia. I played God of War. I played Devil May Cry. I played a lot of action games. I grew up loving action games, Zelda and like adventure action. That was my genre at the time. You think you know how to play this, and the game tells you you don't know how to play this game. You do not know. Like, this is not going to work here. You have to totally rethink, reimagine how to play this game. And it's interesting to me that FromSoft has done that not only once, like with the introduction of Demon's Souls, but then when Sekiro came out, I tried playing Sekiro like Dark Souls, and you cannot do that. It totally like reinvents it again, where you just have to change your approach to, and the fact that like it's but like what you're saying, Hat, with do you want to sit down and relax and have some entertainment, or do you want something to challenge you? I think both things, depending on your mood, depending on what you're in the mood for, I guess, can be very, very valuable experiences. It's just about like, what do I want out of this experience? And if you find yourself in the mood for something that's going to really change your paradigm on action games, and that is going to make you really think about how you are progressing through it, that's where all the satisfaction really comes from the gameplay loop of Dark Souls. it's not a fun game to play at first. It's fun when you've figured it out and you're like, okay, I'm having some success. I'll say it's satisfying more than being fun. You can interchange those words. Something being satisfying can also be fun, but it's not fun to get your ass kicked. And that's, I don't know. It's kind of the same thing with movies too. Like sometimes someone will say, oh, this movie's not entertaining or it's not fun to watch. Or a lot of people say that about Death Stranding. I think that's a good example. I really liked Death Stranding. And a lot of people are like, this game's not fun. Well, it's not trying to be fun. It's trying, it's going for something else. Like it's trying to make you think about things. And so
are you in the mood for that? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you kind of have to change your paradigm a bit about what you're looking for if you want to enjoy Dark Souls.
I get it. It's the difference between going to the beach and walking and running, right? It's
or whatever. Yeah.
All right, Hat. Let me tell you this.
Okay.
Let me tell you when Dark Souls clicks for you. It is when you are so desperate to kill this boss that you have gone over 20 to 30 times to try to beat. And when you finally take him down, the amount of adrenaline and dopamine you gain from that experience is like none other. It is absolutely amazing. You go straight to the gym afterwards and pick up the heaviest weight you can. Then you figure out you can't actually pick it up, which brings you right back down. But that's something you do. And people
probably get into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu then, Eric. Yeah, I think you'd like that. That's very much like Dark Souls. It's the Dark Souls of sports.
the Dark Souls of MMA.
It's a Dark Souls of real life.
He just beat Dark Souls. Everyone get back.
No, I totally get where you guys are coming from. So yeah, I get where you guys are coming from. Like, but I can relate because I've had those experiences in other things, right? Where there was an extreme challenge and that I overcame that challenge, and I got a dopamine hit. Probably when I joined the Marine Corps, there was a lot of difficulty with that, and just like not believing I could do something, and I got there. I realized it's a little bit different with Dark Souls. We'll see. So. All right.
It's not for everyone, basically.
Blim, blim, plom.
Anyways.
All right. So let's go over some other picks that people had for the PlayStation 3, and then we're going to transition into the PlayStation 4 and talk about The Witcher, and then we'll close this podcast out. We do have a little bit of a hard limit, so we'll have to be concise, but I think it'll still be a good conversation. For the PlayStation 3, we have Trails of Cold Steel 1. Eric's favorite RPG, and we have Tales of Grace's F, the Legend of
on the throne of lies.
The Legend of Heroes Trails of Cold Steel 2, also Eric's second favorite. Mass Effect 2, great game. Dark Souls.
Mass Effect 2 is awesome.
Yeah, Mass Effect 2 is amazing. Tales of Xillia, Final Fantasy 13-2. I think that's a troll comment.
I think that was Hian's pick.
Dragon Age Origins. Trails of Cold. Okay, we got some more repeats. Final Fantasy 13, Demon Souls, Skyrim. Another on here a couple times. Skyrim was a big game on the PlayStation 3. So, yeah, some.
So I'm just going to say this real quick. If we had been talking about PlayStation, because I thought we were talking about PlayStation, Mass Effect was not on the PlayStation. Mass Effect is, for me, like a top 10 video game. I would rank it above Dark Souls, but that was not on the PlayStation, so I don't know what people are talking about.
I believe I think 2 and 3 came.
Yeah, 2 and 3 did come to the PlayStation.
Did they eventually come over?
Yeah, because that's where I played it.
The end?
Yeah.
Really? I didn't realize that they had ported it.
But I don't consider that. I'm with you. I don't consider that a.
I think about Xbox when I think about.
Yeah, I agree.
Or PC.
I agree.
Metal Gear Solid 4 is another very good JRPG.
Oh, jeez.
It's a great JRPG. I agree.
Got numbers in it. I call fair game.
All right, so let's move on to the PS4. This will be our last game that we're going to talk about. But The Witcher 3, I think this game is iconic in of itself. It really changed open world games. I think for side quest structure, it really put a new expectation, I think, for DLC as well. Whereas at that time, you're just kind of getting these crap low effort DLCs, and then Witcher 3 came out and it was like, this is better than the main game. So
Yeah.
I think it was really special for that reason. But Mike, I know you are like the biggest Witcher 3 fan here. And
Love that game.
you have a channel where you're permanently stuck talking about JRPGs.
I can never talk about it.
So go ahead. Let's talk about The Witcher 3. What do you got?
Okay. The Witcher 3 doesn't revolutionize combat. It doesn't revolutionize open world exploration. It doesn't revolutionize much outside of, I feel like, questing was, and I would think it might be a step, an overreach to say it revolutionized it so much as it just perfected it. The Witcher 3 is all about questing. To the extent that I think I've talked to a couple of people who are like, man, I can't level up. What's going on? Again, kind of a paradigm shift.
Mhm.
Going around killing monsters won't level you up in The Witcher. What levels you up is completing quests.
Yeah.
It's all about going to a place, finding somebody who has a problem, learning, and through that experience, learning by just increments over time. The peeling of the layers of this really cool universe, world, and all the politics and just like the depth of the world building is sort of peeled a bit at a time through its questing. And there are games with a lot of great RPGs that have great questing. Again, this is more of a indicative of a Western RPG thing. Western RPGs have got questing right for a long time, but The Witcher 3, I think, kind of took it to another level. And I don't really know how to explain my love for the game beyond that. That's probably like the best way I could put it in like a succinct way. But it like there's one quest in the game's tutorial area in White Orchard, where you go to discover like what happened to a well. It's been like poisoned or something like that.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And you learn about witchers and their abilities, and you learn about potions, and like his alchemy. You learn about monsters in the world, and like there's this very simple little scenario, but it's well written and it's engaging from a storytelling standpoint. You get really invested in what happened to this girl who got turned into this ghost type monster.
Yeah. Wraith, that's what it was. Yeah,
a wraith. Yeah, a wraith. And you explore like all the things that make the world of The Witcher really fascinating are just like compact into this very dense little quest. And it's like the first taste of what that game does consistently from beginning to end. It's like the questing on the side that you're doing is almost always more interesting than like the main plot. And some people will say that that's a detractor from it. Like the main plot isn't very interesting. I don't think it's not interesting as much as it is just like the details of how you're getting from place to place and the way that they build your attachment to Geralt and Ciri and Yennefer and all these great characters, what it means to them along the way. Again, this is more of an execution over ideas, which is kind of the type of storyteller that I like. It's not that I don't love big ideas. Obviously, if you could have both, amazing. If you can perfectly execute the most elaborate, amazing, mind-bending plot twists and ideas, and you're just sitting there like, whoa, that's amazing. But a lot of times what happens is that the idea is too ambitious and the execution fails it. And I prefer the other way around if you can't make that work, to make sure that you're executing on a level from moment to moment to where the audience is captured and just engrossed and just being pulled through this experience and just in love with the place. And they're not asking a lot of questions, and they're not criticizing or distracted as they're going along. And I think that The Witcher 3 is one of the better examples of that I've seen in video games in probably the last decade. And I will also say that if you're not a big fan of its main plot, the expansions, like you were talking about, how it sort of like changed the way people looked at, or I guess returned to the way DLC used to be back in the good old days on the personal computer, the RPGs back then with the expansions, right? It took it back to like, this is how you should be doing it, right? So, but those stories, the main plots of the expansions are top notch. The Heart of Stone and Blood and Wine, from a storytelling perspective, just freaking amazing. And on top of that, it got me interested in the novel series, which is even better storytelling wise. And this is already exceptional. It's even better. And like the way that it paid tribute to those novels, the way that it like inserted pieces of it, it makes it so replayable to where I played The Witcher 3. I actually played The Witcher 2 and The Witcher 1 before that. I went and read the novels. I came back to Witcher 3 and I went, holy crap. Didn't know that. Didn't realize that the first time. You know, it makes it very replayable, and it just has a very satisfying way of bringing this enormous freaking world together and presenting it in a way to where it just flows and it's smooth and it's interesting and it's nuanced, crazy levels of nuance in the way it presents very complicated and complex sort of moral conundrums, and it's just phenomenal. I just love it.
Let me comment here real quick on what you were saying with the questing, because from my perspective, I sometimes would have a hard time with Western RPGs because you get the option of choice with the dialogue, or you have to make a choice. And I would just get frustrated because I would want the best ending. And I wouldn't want to play this super long RPG, get to the end and find out I got like the crappy ending and the game's almost laughing at me because 80 hours ago I said no, you know, not knowing anything.
That's super frustrating. Definitely.
But what I think that The Witcher 3 in particular really changed me a little bit on this is that in that game, that's part of the philosophy that Geralt has of non-intervention. And one of the very early quests, this isn't like a mainline story quest. You can do it within the first 45 minutes. So I don't consider this a huge spoiler, but just as a little taste, there's just a side quest you can do where there's this dwarf character who's like a blacksmith in the first 45 minutes, and his shack is like burnt down, and Geralt takes on a quest to basically find who burnt down his shed. And there's some kind of, you know, people are mad at him for helping, you know, the Niflheim soldiers and such, and building their, you know, their armor and everything like that. So he knows that someone in town did it. So you naturally, with your own RPG mind, right? You've been playing RPGs since you're a little kid. Okay, I'm going to find this kid or whoever it is, return it. Then they're going to forgive each other, and I'm going to get some money. I'm going to level up, and we're going to carry on with our questing. So I find this kid. It's like literal. I think he's like a teenager, but whatever. I find this guy who burnt down the shack. I bring him to the dwarf, and I say, "This is the guy." And the guy's like apologizing. He's like, "I was drunk. I'm sorry," you know. And the dwarf just says, "Fuck that. Come over here." And he's like, "This guy burnt down our shack." Right. And then the soldiers are like, "We needed this to support our troops. Hang him." And then they hang the guy. And I'm like, that's not what I thought was going to happen. I wouldn't have turned in this guy. This was not there's so many quests where that's the case, where that's part of the game. Like, you don't know how something's going to turn out. And that's Geralt's point, that sometimes it's better to not get involved because you don't know how it's going to turn out.
Every time he has gotten involved, it usually turns out like that, which has kind of turned him into this very hard, neutral, jaded kind of person. It doesn't matter what I do, something bad will come of it. That's not necessarily something bad will come of it, but it's not going to go the way I expect. Right.
Stigma of the Witchers.
It's too complex. Nothing ever gets tied with a bow and just works out perfectly. And so, you know, you have to really pick and choose your battles. You have to really believe in it. Otherwise, you could end up making it worse. But
that's the thing, though, because I found that with some of the decisions that I made where it did turn out badly, particularly in the Red Baron or Bloody Baron quest, I kind of felt okay with the way it turned out anyways.
Yeah.
Because emotionally, I was like, I feel like I did what I would have done, you know, and there's no way I could have known. And it felt okay that it didn't go the way that I wanted.
That's almost part of the point.
Right.
That experience you had is part of the Witcher's core, like, intention.
Yes.
It doesn't want to make you feel bad, like, oh, you made the wrong choice. It wants to make you reflect on your choice and go, well, I really believed in that. Like, why didn't it work out? And you start to understand that there's a lot more to the situation than you originally realized. And it's like you learn from it rather than feeling like I got to go back and redo it. I got the bad ending. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What I love that they did in that game was like Geralt himself is a character. It's not simply just a character you pick at the beginning and like most Western RPGs. And every choice that is shown that he has in the dialogue tree, like everyone I look at, I believe that is something Geralt would do in a given situation, and nothing feels out of place with that. And that is definitely an aspect I like. And just overall with the Witcher game, which by the way is my favorite Western RPG now.
Yeah.
Like it's been ever since I first started playing it. And I like when you mentioned earlier, people had some criticism about the main plot. I think definitely in the Witcher's case, it is the journey that's more important than what happens like at the very end. Because this feels like a TV series to me that like there's an overall end goal to the game, but you're going through subsequent episodes along the way, but you haven't ultimately lost focus of what your goal is. And that's actually what makes the world feel alive too, is that it's believable that Geralt will go out and questing to all these areas because he, simply put, is a Witcher and he does this stuff for money.
He's not a prince.
He's not a prince who forgot his credit card and has to get frogs.
Anyways, let's keep going.
to that, it's like the world is believable, and the world is as much of important as a character than the actual characters themselves.
Yeah,
and they both need to work and coincide with each other, or everything just feels out of place, and you start questioning things like FF.
Right.
Like, why is a prince taking quests from these people when they should be doing everything in their power to help him instead? That's not how it works in Witcher. The Witcher is like, he'll do it for you, but for coin.
Yeah.
Totally agree with that. I have one question for you, Mike. Are you Triss or are you Yennefer?
Yennefer, all the way.
Really?
And this is due to the novel history with reading the novels.
Triss all day.
That's your preferred waifu?
No. I don't like Yennefer personally. I like Yennefer for Geralt in terms of the stories, in terms of like their history and where they've come up to that point. If you've read the novels, to me, I don't understand how you couldn't feel that way.
I agree.
Like, especially with the fact that Triss essentially just totally took advantage of his amnesia and was using him. Like she's not. I don't want to say she's a bad person. Again, going back to the FF10 conversation, we criticize the way people think more than whether or not they're good or bad people. But I don't like how Trish took advantage of Geralt and Yennefer and Geralt. That of all, I'm not like huge into romance. Like I don't in terms of like media, because it's usually very badly written, and it's usually written for this it's usually always happy ending, you walk into the sunset, but that's not how relationships are. Relationships are freaking hard, and two people trying to learn how to live with each other's garbage is very, very freaking frustrating. And I have never seen, at least in my personal experience for relationships, a more accurate representation of that, of what it means to choose to love somebody and to like work through things that you think are impossible to get past than Geralt and Yennefer's relationship. And by the time that we get to the end of The Witcher 3, the way that those two characters have changed from when the moment they met each other is incredible.
Yeah.
It's really well done.
Totally agree.
Batman has had a lot of relationships within the comic series, but everyone is always more entertained by Batman and Catwoman because that just makes for much better entertainment overall. Just watching these two different kind of ideologies clash with each other, but still love each other. And that's kind of a similar thing with Geralt and Yennefer, is they are kind of like opposite in the spectrum, their ideology on like, on many things, but something besides the spell that binds them together. Does bind them together regardless. And I felt that quest where they get rid of the Jin's curse.
Yes, it's so
and they
good.
find out.
It's great. It's fantastic.
So good.
That really showed how strong of a relationship they have with each other.
Yeah, because that's what started it, right? Their infatuation with each other started almost exclusively because of this Jin's curse. But now they've been through like 20, 30 years of stuff together, and not just the good. I mean, like all the bad that like compounds into this learning who a person really is at their core, seeing them be behind the belief systems that make it really hard to like deal with them sometimes. It's so frustrating. And you see that person, you see the potential for that person, and you see that you decide I want to help that person get there. And I like how they challenge me. I like how they see that in me, and they're helping me get there. And so after 30 years of believing that it might just be this curse, it's like, no, the 30 years created the genuine love that they have. And to me, that's a way, way more satisfying romance and love story than whatever they're trying to do with Triss or whoever else that they have thrown in there. Those are just obstacles in the story of Yennefer and Geralt.
Yeah, that moment when that curse finally lifts, or looking at the sunset, and they look at each other and like, do you feel any different? And one of them says, no. I was just like, that was just genius. Like the way that was written.
So good. It's so good.
Yeah. But I feel like a horrible person when I have to say no to Triss, basically. I just feel terrible doing that. But anyways, we could go on this forever. So let's go ahead and just kind of end the PS4 here, but we do want to read real quick some of the other picks for the PS4. We got Persona 5 Royal, great game. I've just been playing that recently. Did not like Persona 4. Persona 5 is the better game. Anyways,
I don't like
dislike button is down below the video. Then we have Tales of Berseria. It's a good game. Dragon Age Inquisition, Bloodborne, Nier Automata, Dragon Quest 11, great game. Final Fantasy 14, Persona 5 again. Let's see, Final Fantasy 7 Remake. Somebody chose not to answer. That says a lot. Ys 8, and then Witcher 3. So all some pretty great
and
games.
Metal Gear Solid 5.
And Ground Zeroes.
I don't know how anyone here feels about Metal Gear Solid 5. I haven't even played it yet, but I saw a great video. I'm going to send it to all of you after this.
Okay.
Really, really, really good because there's been a lot of detractors to Metal Gear Solid 5, right? Like, Kojima has really just like lost it now. He's just like so self-indulgent at this point. It's just like, but this guy really puts it in a light that made me appreciate what he was trying to do there a lot more. I'm going to send it to everybody. See, I want to see what you guys think about it.
I think I know what video you're talking about, because it did legitimately make me go a little softer on MGS5 because the gameplay is amazing, but like I had some problems with the story. But the more I went through it, it's like I've grown a
really
little
makes
more
you feel like Kiefer Sutherland.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, gents, we did have two other questions on here that I'm just going to real quick. Looks like mostly everyone chose the PS1 for their favorite RPG console, except there were a few PS2s and one PS3. So I think that kind of mimics what we were saying, that the PS1 was really the...
I apologize to that person. I don't mean to put you down, but PS3 is literally the worst era in the history of JRPGs.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Literally
we said
the bottom of the
RPGs
barrel.
in general, but yeah, they weren't very good for RPGs either. I mean, there were some good
Thanks
ones.
for letting me know, Mike.
And then we also asked, do you prefer Western RPGs or JRPGs? And surprisingly, everyone put JRPG.
Everyone.
That validates my worldview.
No, I mean, we have a very
JRPGs are
targeted
good.
audience, so that
Right.
just makes sense. But yeah, I thought that'd be interesting to see. So, all right, well, I think that's going to wrap up this week's podcast. I want to throw out a huge thank you to both Mike and Hian for joining us. Hian for waking up early in Japan and spending your time with us, and then Mike, I know you're busy with everything you got going on, so really appreciate both of you coming on tonight. It's just been a great conversation. So
Yeah, thanks for having us on. And you guys have been huge. All of you have been huge. Every single person on this panel been among like the top supporters of my work. So, I mean, anytime. I love coming on and talking to you guys. You guys are great. Thank you for
Thanks for
inviting me.
coming on, man.
If anyone is curious,
Thanks for having me.
real quick, all of us met on Mike's Discord. So
It's true.
Phoenix Edge originated on the Resonant Arc Discord. So you guys should go check that out.
I am
It's
the
pretty
father
meta.
of Phoenix Edge.
Yes, I can't put it any better.
Don't say that stuff, man. We'll have to pay him royalties in the future.
No, you guys have done plenty for me. So absolutely appreciate you guys.
Yep. All right, so that's going to wrap us up. Thank you again for checking us out this week, and we will see you all next week. Take it easy, guys.
See you next time.